Well, thank you for staying with Mirror now. A big news coming in that homosexuality is no longer a crime in India. We're keeping a close eye on all of the responses. It's a long, hard-fought battle that's gone on for several years between the Delhi High Court, the Supreme Court, and now back again to the Supreme Court. But we finally have a verdict. The Supreme Court has decided today, unanimously, in a 5-judge bench, that homosexuality is finally decriminalised. The 5-member bench of the Supreme Court scripted history today, overturning the rule that dates back to the British Raj that criminalised homosexuality or unnatural sex. Observing that history owes an apology to the LGBT community, the Supreme Court, by unanimous opinion, ruled that the LGBTQ community possesses the same rights as any other Indian. In fact, in the studio with me, we have Dr. Prasad Dandekar, MD of the Radiation Oncology Department at the Reliance Hospital. Dr. Dandekar, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to you. You have been a great supporter in this entire battle, and we owe it to all of you. Thank you.
Now, I know it has been a long battle, and Vinay Tiwari is with us in the studio looking specifically at the legal nuances of this very interesting judgment that's coming out today. But I remember one of the reasons why we brought you into the studio was to sort of illustrate to our audience and maybe to parents who are watching that you can be gay and still be like a cool doctor. And you know, it doesn't have to derail your ambition or your life, or you know, you can still be a well-adjusted member of society. So portions of the Supreme Court order sort of echo that sentiment, that we need to remove prejudice entirely.
Yeah, I mean, a gay man can be a successful doctor just as a left-handed man can be a successful doctor. There is no difference. The only problem was we had a British era law which made it very difficult for everyone, and the legal system, of course, has an implication on the societal way of thinking, and the whole society was sort of against homosexuality because of the legal battle that was going on. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, the parents need to understand that being gay or being lesbian or a member of the LGBT community is no longer a crime, and they should support their children in achieving their own full potential in their life and not suppress their emotions and their feelings, and that will help them to live fully in their life.
Yes, in fact, I see live visuals coming in there. This is the press conference, and these are the petitioners who had actually petitioned. Keshav Suri from the Lalit was the main petitioner here, making that argument that we're actually hurting the GDP of the country by not allowing the LGBTQ community to live and work and express themselves. So that's a celebration there. You know, I'm assuming what looks like the Lalit. That's Keshav Suri. So. Yes, and his partner or his husband is with him. But this is also an important argument. Workspaces allowing people to, you know, like Dr. Dandekar, to sort of express themselves and still be ambitious and still be very successful.
Yes, and I think, as one of our other panelists had mentioned very correctly, this judgment or this issue wasn't just about sexual relationships. It was more than that. It was about share in property. It was about rights that you would enjoy. It was about government paperwork. It was about being recognized as legitimate individuals. And it was about health as well. A lot of the health initiatives were perhaps not possible because this particular section made it an illegal act. And I think all of those issues put together comprehensively has an impact on, as you said, probably the economy, on the society per se, even I would say, even on the very precious time of courts. I mean, this was needless litigation that was going on for years and years, not just in the Supreme Court, but even in the trial courts where the police would present these cases, and a complete distraction and a waste of time. And I guess all of these put together will perhaps ease off a whole lot of other issues, not just the issue of gay sex.
In fact, you know, one of the things that we should point out is the next battle will be the battle for the right to get married, the battle for the right to co-own property, to adopt. So, for example, for our viewers who might not really understand what we're talking about, imagine if you loved someone your entire life and you lived together like a married couple, although you do not have the legal right to get married at this point, but you can never be considered the person's next of kin. That is a difficult, that's a difficult situation where if someone is in hospital, you have no right to that information because you are technically on paper not the next of kin. You are not a spouse or a family member at all. You're a complete stranger as far as the law is concerned. Dr. Radhika?
Yeah, and we face this issue quite often in the hospital. You know, a patient is very seriously ill and we need to give some consent for a procedure, or we need to, say for example, turning off the ventilator in a situation where, you know, the person is not being, you know, it is not possible to revive the person. And the partner, like for example, I've been with my partner for 14 years, God forbid something happens to me, and if I'm admitted in the hospital will not consider his signature as a valid signature on anything. And it's a shame because I want him to be my next of kin. And I think that is going to be the next battle. And whether you call it marriage, whether you call it civil partnership, whatever it is, but a union which is recognized legally and will have implications on all the paperwork as well as rights, basic rights, will be the next thing to do. And one of the justices, I think Justice Chandrachud, has already pointed out that this is just a beginning, and this judgment will have an implication on a lot of other legal aspects as well.
Right. Vinay, we haven't, I mean, I do believe that the reading out is now done and we haven't picked up any, further details. But the fact that the UN has taken note, this would also mean that the international community will now begin to take note as well. And this sort of moves India from a category or not a very good club. A company was not great among other countries.
Company was not great, and if we fancy ourselves as a modern country, a developed country, or a country which is in the top 6-7 nations of the world on various parameters, this is a very important aspect. You cannot be a developed country, you cannot be a modern society if you have a law of the nature that 377 was. And that's perhaps the reason why a UN press release has been issued so quickly, immediately after the judgment virtually. It was almost as if they were waiting for this, because normally press releases from UN offices don't come so quickly. They are a fairly slow bureaucratic organization. They don't issue press releases so quickly. So obviously they were waiting for it, and I think that's a lesson in many ways. Also, as we were discussing earlier, the international media, for instance, right now, every single international media house right now, whether in US or Europe, has one of the top stories about this judgment, and it does tell you that the sheer size of this country and the number of people this law impacted is so huge, that in this sense, this judgment is very historic. In one swoop, tens and millions of people have been, in that sense, become part of the mainstream. In that
well,
sense.
it's one thing we must acknowledge, and I'll ask my team to put up that the list of judges, those 5 judges who made history today, we're just going to run that on the screen. Chief Justice of India, Deepak Mishra, will retire on
30th of September.
The 30th of September, at the end of this month. This is part of his legacy, and all of those those news articles that are being written around the world will carry his name. This is part of that important legacy that he's setting down.
Yes, and I think this is perhaps the third milestone in his journey. I mean, the first was the right to privacy judgment. The second was asking the government to recognize the third gender as a gender, the transgenders as a third gender in itself, and now this, because each of them are actually interconnected in that sense. And I think today's judgment makes it clear that they don't want this to end right here. It probably needs to go extend to the kind of things that Dr. Saab was mentioning, and that it perhaps needs to go down to greater rights, whether it is financial rights or whether it is simply a question of health, or even a question of being accepted at institutions as partners, as legitimate partners.
Keshav Suri is speaking with the press right now. He was the main petitioner. We'll just cut across to that.
In this community, it's also going to open doors for insurance, for inheritance. मेरे जो खुद के company में है वहाँ पर भी I have more than 10 trans people that are working for me. अब ये बाहर आएगा कि no transgender is no longer just prostitutes and beggars. They are also people. We are also people. We run businesses. We also work. We're blue collar workers, white collar workers. We're everywhere. The LGBT2 community is too big now for us to ignore. We're everywhere, we're a part of you. Normalization is what we want and what we need.
Is this the end of the fight?
Oh no, it's just the beginning.
How are you going to take it?
Well, I mean, I have to, of course, talk to the lawyers and find out how that's going to be forward. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to voice about at least the fact that I'm married and I want my marriage at least legalized here. And I know that there's so many others who want to do the same. And more importantly, I know that my own team members want to be a part of society. They don't want to just have a place to work, but they also want housing. They also want to be able to integrate and not to be looked down upon anymore. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, let's also go across to Shrija, who's standing by at the Bangalore Town Hall, where celebrations continue. In fact, incidentally, the most colourful celebrations and the loudest celebrations today are in Bangalore. So we understand that in Mumbai, between 4 and 6, there will be a mini Pride March that will take place at the Mumbai University. Shrija, will there be a Pride March in Bangalore as well, if you can hear me?
Well, the celebrations at this point in time have come to an end here, right here at Town Hall. However, we can still see the kind of happiness over here, right here at this landmark location, the Town Hall. Remember now, these were the very people that you saw a couple of minutes ago, where they were trying to dance and sing songs and also talk about the victory that they were waiting for all these years. Now, of course, you did point to the fact whether they're going to have a Pride March or not. Yes, they are planning to carry out a Pride March. This is especially from this very location, from the Town Hall, and then they will be moving a little forward to MG Road, which is about a couple of kilometers away. This is just spreading love and happiness and the kind of victory that they have received today.
All right, Shrija, many thanks for bringing us that update from Bangalore. So our reporters in Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi, Mumbai are with those celebrating, as Mirana has stood with those fighting for the last year since we launched this channel. In the studio with me, Harish Iyer and Sushant Devikar, both activists, both fought a long and hard battle. And I can see it's a moment to celebrate for both of you. Harish, you first. I've seen the battle that you fought, and it has not been easy. It's also about offering counseling, offering psychological help to those who are going through what they're going through. What would this judgment mean to the entire community?
I think this opens this, first of all, it reaffirms the fact that we all are equal under the law. It also means that this paves the way for many more reforms, like reforms in terms of whether it's health reforms, whether it's getting more laws, like getting more anti-discriminatory laws, anti-bullying laws, anti-ragging laws when it comes to bullying people in campuses. I think this paves the way for everything. And I'm so elated, and I'm thankful to Mira now and to you, Faye, that if there's a channel which has throughout made it an agenda, you never had the show as a debate show. You had it as an advocacy show, because seriously, my right of loving somebody in private, I don't put it out on a debate. It is only advocacy, and thank you so much for that.
It's been a pleasure to fight alongside, and this is something as a channel, and we started the conversation like this. Journalists are not allowed to have opinions, but in this particular case, we've given ourselves that liberty. Sushant, for those who have been struggling, and these are the things that the courts are now talking about, sensitizing police officers, publicizing this judgment, allowing people to know that this is what the court has decided and this is why the court has decided. So a lot of what the judgment is saying is what we've been asking for. So it's really a beautiful judgment from the Supreme Court.
And also, I think now that legal acceptance has been taken care of, I think we need to now concentrate on educating, I think, the masses, and that's how social acceptance will come, and it will be a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And so Harish and I will make sure that we put in more hours, and so you can see bigger dark circles.
I think we will have to be at it now. I think it's only began.
Yeah,
I mean, this is only the beginning. This is not, of course, the beginning of celebrations.
So we've had the conversation up till now about just the legality of it, and once we get hard copies of the order and we're able to read through the judgment, we'll actually be able to look at the nuances that the court has put down for us. But I want to consider all of the other things. And, Keshav Suri was actually just talking to the press. He said it's about insurance, it's about owning property, it's about next of kin, it's about housing, it's about all of these things. So even if we were to just start at one point, and I remember the first show we did, where we had Harish on that show, was about how it's impossible or close to impossible to simply get housing.
Yeah. True.
as a member of the LGBT community. Nobody wants to rent you a home in any of our big cities. Nobody wants to, everybody's suspicious about what's going on. There's a lot of talking. If we were to just start at that one point, would that be a big difference? Do you think that legally at least, or culturally speaking, this judgment would make a difference there?
It should, ideally, because it pushes the envelope in many ways. It pushes people to do things. One other thing that impacts is adoption. We have incredibly complicated adoption laws. We have a country where there are a very large number of children who do not have parents, and adoption is not easy in this country, and it perhaps will lead way to that as well.
No, but I must point out, in the affidavit that the government of India placed before the Supreme Court, they said very clearly that as far as this, as far as the unnatural sex is concerned, we leave it up to the wisdom of the court. But if it comes to matters of adoption or marriage or of other things, we would like to weigh in at that point.
Precisely. So the government will always remain a voice whenever those issues come up in the court. But from going by the evidence that we have so far of the nuggets that we've heard from the various judgments, and that's why I think it's very, very important that we read all 4 of them. My sense is that the courts in these 4, the judges in these 4 judgments that they've written, the 5 of them, would have pushed society and the government to start thinking on those lines, because I remember one line very clearly from Justice Chanchu's judgment, which he says that this is the starting point, this is not the culmination of a problem. And I think perhaps in some ways he's trying to nudge the authorities into thinking that way.
Yes, in fact, just reading out of that, this thing was placed before the court, it said, most petitions being heard by the Honourable Bench are filed recently considering these issues. Anything raised beyond the scope of reference that this particular issue was considering would require a detailed counter affidavit. So the state was, was very clear, the government was very clear that they are only talking about consensual sex between 2 adults. Anything else that we would require another hearing or another affidavit.
Even in this case, the government's position was rather grudging. I mean, to be honest, the government very grudgingly went to the court and finally said, okay, I leave it to your wisdom and we don't want to talk about this. This was a grudging response. This was not a response they would have ideally wanted to give, because they think differently.
So let's consider the fact that the Supreme Court here has sort of nudged the government into action and said, you now have to take this forward.
Yes.
You're not allowing them to sort of say, okay, now you decide.
But in the absence of this judgment, even that starting point was not available for these discussions. All the discussions about finance, property, adoption, there wasn't even a starting point. Today, now at least you have a starting point. Of course, the government will have its view, and I'm sure they're going to give a view which will not be favorable to a lot of the people who think that way. But certainly, it provides a starting point. It allows a debate to at least happen in a court.
Dialogue, to start the dialogue.
I think I wanted to point out is, of course, the legal system and the society has a lot of role to play. But along with that, I think corporates have a lot of role to play, and we have corporates like Godrej and few others who have actually paved the way where they are giving equal rights to not just to the LGBT community, but to their partners, whether it is insurance or others. And I think that will also have an impact, because if you're working for a corporate who's very accepting, every individual working in that organization will also then hopefully be sensitized, and that's one of the ways that the society will change and have an impact on. So the corporates also need to really take up now this thing, and whether it is a large corporate or a small corporate, I think everybody needs to wake up and start acknowledging the rights of their staff who's from LGBT community.
Let's discuss the idea of discomfort. I know personally from conversations that I have had with people who claim to be made uncomfortable by the idea of homosexuality around them. So there's a conversation about, I don't mind, but it makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to be made uncomfortable in my place of work. I don't want to be made uncomfortable. I would prefer if this stage sort of, how do we, and this is the truth now. I mean, we could roll our eyes as much as we like, but the truth is, the step forward then would be to ease the process in as far as possible. What advice do you have?
I think more and more conversations are needed. Conversations in schools, conversations in various religious spaces as well. I think more and more people need to start speaking about homosexuality. Those who are out now, those who are willing to come out and lend their voices should come out in full force and discuss these things. I think conversations are the genesis of change. The more the conversations, the more out LGBT people come out and discuss about their lives, then people would understand that our lives are just as boring as everyone else's. So I think that's something that people need to know.
Or as fun.
Or as fun.
Stop being like saying all boring.
Indian Psychiatric Society's LGBT task force is actually working at very thing that Harish mentioned, that they're actually conducting seminars not only in the schools, but they are also conducting large seminars. For like one of the seminars they conducted was on 500 principals of various schools attended. And so they are starting the change at the very bottom where the child is being in formative years and training them that on equality and human rights. And I think that's a wonderful
I think that's a useful conversation to have right now. And Pramod is standing by in Chennai, and he's with people who are celebrating. But I want to come back and I want to give you all a moment to think about this. People like principals in schools, HR teams in offices, people who will need to be sensitized that, as we might have not even thought of until now. And that's a conversation that we need to have at this point. But first, let me go across to Pramod. Pramod is in Chennai. Who are you with, Pramod? We've lost that line. We'll go back to Pramod. Sensitizing school principals would be important, and we also have Ashok Kavi join us in the studio as well.
I'd like to comment on that.
Yes, go ahead.
Sex education is banned in more than by seven state legislatures. Maharashtra, for example, sex education is banned in schools. So before you even get to the principal, which many of us have, they don't allow you discussion about sexuality with the students or classes. If somebody is doing it, it's against the law. So until you get a lot of these things sorted out, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, for example, was the first to start sex education in secondary schools, but it was banned. Actually, their module is the best. It has been taken up by many private schools. So I think the real work is now, because there's a lot of lack of clarity.
Top of mind for you, what is the first job that needs to be done?
The first job is decriminalization has opened certain doors. In the sense, you can now talk about same-sex marriage. It possibly wasn't possible before. You can even talk of adoption. But all these are huge cans of worms, because certain personal laws don't allow adoption. Muslim personal law doesn't allow adoption. Inheritance among Muslims, a woman gets 1/16 of what her brother gets. Under Hindu Marriage Act, domestic violence is all right. Marital rape is accepted. So where do you get married? Who marries you? Is this marriage recognized by the state? Because it's important. Tenancy laws. One of the reasons a friend of mine could not get married in India was his lover was French. Okay. Now the French lover required 2 years residency to get married in India.
Yes.
And they couldn't get married in France because he required 1 year's residency in France. So what does that mean? Ultimately, they got married in the French consulate under civil law. But why was it necessary? Because of tenancy. If one person died, the other person inherits the tenancy. One is that. Other is the rights to terminal illness.
Yes.
If you are under civil law at today's acts, sometimes the partner is kept out. The natal family comes in and lays claim to the body. So these are very important issues in society that we haven't yet thought about. These battles have been thought about in Europe and America, but they took a long time to come to it. I don't know how it's going to go here.
In fact, legally now, this whole new set of questions need to be asked of the courts, and answers need to be sought about what kind of relationships, what kind of legality will this freedom that has now been given us, what kind of legality will it now find?
The first thing we need to do is to make thousands of photocopies of these judgments and make it mandatory for the cleargy to read it, of all religions. That's the first thing that we need to do. And I think the justices...
I don't think that's going to work.
Anyways, the judges have actually said so.
I was having a fight with the clergy.
This is important, modesty, and this is something that we should tell our audience. In all religions have behaved badly towards the LGBT community, and they still continue to do so. So the sort of thick-headed mindlessness has happened across all religion, and the clergy of all religions.
Yes.
Just like they've all been mean to women, they have all been mean to the LGBT community. So you're right, and some of the things that have been said, we have to vanquish prejudice, embrace inclusion. we should print it out big and slap it on the walls outside of religious
Yes, because even in
places.
this case, even though the government chose to be neutral at the last mile, the opposition was all coming from the clergy. I mean,
Yes.
all the councils that were
Yes.
representing were all different religious groups.
And it's amazing how they all agreed.
They all agreed. They're secular in that
We've
sense.
integrated India.
Yes. So, we can't get the leaders of various religions, whether that's Hinduism or whether that's Islam or Christianity, to agree on anything except when it comes to subjugating women in the LGBT community. At that point, there is a unanimous
No, there is one
decision.
other thing, Faye, which is a little more serious. You asked Ashok a question about whether it should be principals or teachers. I mean, I frankly want to go a step back. It should actually start with families and homes. I mean, for instance, the number of people, and I'm sure they'll bear me out on this, the number of people who are currently trapped in marriages, even though they are gay, simply because the families and the parents haven't understood that at all, is huge. And that devastates not just one person, it devastates more than one person. And it needs to start from the family. I think we are too squeamish about discussing these things in homes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that creates an enormous amount of problem, including cases of depression and a whole lot of other suicidal tendencies as well. I mean, you get trapped in a situation which you can't explain even to your own family members.
True. And it's also
Yes.
about women's rights, because many a times you have closeted men getting married to women and the law is used,
Discuss this on
so it's all interlinked with each other. So it's about our rights, but it's about women's rights too.
Absolutely.
I think the first institution anyone is born into by default is the family.
Yes.
And I think it's very essential to have that conversation and dialogue starting in the family.
No, but
and then
so here's the question: how do you do that? You can't. As much as we would like to bring all parents into a room and sort of brief them, it's not possible. But you can bring principals of schools into a room, because there's an institution involved. You can bring HR's, representatives,
associations.
PTA associations. So there has to be. It's also about. I mean, we know we have to have these conversations, but how do we action them? How do we make this happen? What is the route?
No, it can be, and I'll tell you, media, for instance, broadcast media of all forms, not just news media, whether it is films or whether it is broadcast media, whether it's radio. But the first thing we need to do is to normalize the topic of sex.
Yes.
It's so awkward. People are squeamish about it. I mean, you mentioned the word sex, and there are a lot of people who start smiling. They'll start looking the other way. They won't look into the eye. I think mass media needs to start normalizing that communication, and that will then force people who will ultimately be part of families. I mean, a youngster today will become a family man 10 years from now. That's how this change will happen. I think the broadcast media itself
Yes.
either is repressive about sexuality or is very awkward and squeamish about it, and that creates the problem.
Which is what one of our previous guests said also, this conversation, which has been limited to just sex.
True.
That this has been a battle for us to have the kind of sex we want to have. But it's not about that. It's about right to life, almost, very basically. And this is something I wanted to share with you. And we'll go back to Pramod. We understand we have that link right now. When the judgment came, he was speaking to a young person in Chennai who spoke to him, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, maybe now I don't have to consider suicide. We actually had a law that made suicide an option for young people. And that is where we need to start from when we talk about it today, the fact that it affects people that deeply. And Pramod is back with us. Pramod, who do you have with you right now? And what's happening in Chennai?
Going to everywhere around the street, and this is one location called as Sahodaran, and people are here. In fact, I would like to talk to one of the very important person who have been a backbone to everybody, and everybody who have met them, they have spoken about this personally. Thank you for talking to us. And today's verdict, and right now I saw that after celebrating the verdict, you also lit candles over there to remember those who have passed away. Can you explain a bit about that?
Yeah, this is Jaya only talk.
Oh, she would like to explain to us. You also remember the person who have lost their lives until now. You lit a candle. What was that about?
Actually, one gay person, I don't mention the name, okay? The police cops, 5 or 6 cops continuously racking with the, teasing with this gay man, and he has faced lots of problems from them, and then he escaped from home to other country. Now he is living in LGBT friendly country. Not only this, okay, they lost their identity, and they are still now they are hidden. So, but in future, today onwards, it will not happen. We are going to give mega sensitization programs who are not accept the
Who are
people.
afraid about their
Yes.
identity. So this particular judgment has given you one of the biggest strength that you have
Yes,
passed for all this while.
The biggest milestone of LGBT community journey. Actually, we have received a verdict from Delhi High Court in 2012, 2009, July 2nd. No, that historical verdict says AP Shah and Muralidhar says consensual sex is not crime within the adults in the private room. But after the Supreme Court verdict says totally against for 2009 verdict. But now Constitutional Bench, 5 judges bench and Chief Justice of Supreme Court of India given historical verdict. So we are very happy. We are going to celebrate the Mehalaya.
And do you believe that after this particular Supreme Court's verdict, you will face lesser harassment in the society?
Before that, I'll tell you one thing. In the Pakamanga.
All right, that's the way they are celebrating all across this particular location called as Sahodharan. This has been one of the kind of like a zone, a house which has given protection to people from Chennai who have like found out their identity and have come over here because many times they had to face atrocity in their family and the surrounding. But this particular area, if you could see behind me, this has been a shelter to them, and many have come over here and stayed at this place, given safety, security, and a backbone also. This is Namita. Namita earlier saw that you had candles lit over there. What was the reason behind it?
It was something that we were trying to do for all of our fallen brethren, people who had died, who've been killed, who had committed suicide as well because of this draconian law. And this killing doesn't just happen. It's not just a one-off thing because families think it's okay to commit hate crimes. So it's dishonor killing that we've lost so many of us to. So it is in remembrance of all those people did we light candles.
Wonderful. So the flag you see over here, this rainbow flag, it's also a symbol of peace and brotherhood. It has won today and they are celebrating it that way in Chennai.
All right, Pramod, many thanks for that update. A sort of somber moment there. People, it's also a time to remember those we've lost to the injustice. Harish?
Absolutely. There's so many people who are in the fringes. There's so many people after the 2013 verdict. The number of suicide attempts, number of suicides that were successful also, where we have lost so many people. And you'd have families also following the law, because they would say that, oh, if you'd come out of the closet, the law of the land is also not supporting you. Or they would either pack people out of the country, or they would say, okay, if you're over here, then you can't be gay because they're concerned. It comes out of concern.
And here's the thing, and we had this conversation a little earlier in the day, that if you have privilege of money, of education, of living in a city that's slightly as crowded as say a Mumbai, so nobody really notices you, then you're okay. But what happens when your parents can't afford to pack you off overseas, when your parents aren't as educated as one might hope? This whole idea that the LGBT community is limited to, say, fashion and Bollywood and television is not true. What happens to the people in the villages? What happens to the people in smaller towns where there's no place to hide, where society is fairly intrusive? That's where really, yes.
When we talk of affluent community, and even if you talk of the affluent community of a city like Mumbai or Delhi, it's not easy. It is not easy. I know of people who come from very affluent family, are forced into marriages and have terrible life because the family says that, we can't afford for our family name's sake that, to let people know that our son is a criminal. So the affluent people maybe have a little bit lesser brunt to bear, but it is pervasive. It is throughout the society, throughout the entire pyramid from top to bottom, that everybody suffered this law. It's not that some people didn't suffer and some people suffered more.
And mental health, Faye. I mean, the number of people who have who are suffering from depression and mental health is, anyways, mental health is being neglected. And the more you are living in the fear of getting busted, it gets even more challenging, because the more you think that, okay, I'm going to do something, someone is going to spy on me and then I'm going to get caught. Obviously, there are a lot of things that happen. Of course, mental health, also health in general, you take more risks that time because you get only that little time. Even HIV, for that matter. Now, previously health workers, if they had to go out and this thing, so someone had to come and say that, you know what, I'm having sex with a man. And having sex with a man was illegal. So now that it's there, so even when it comes to penetration within the HIV positive community and diagnosis over there, that also is going to get much easier.
But I think
Sushant, you function as a counselor as well, and do you have a lot of young people coming to you struggling with this?
A lot of them, and moreover now that that there is a little dialogue that happens, and this is what I think you were trying to say, is that this dialogue can't even happen in the more rural areas.
True.
Is what you were trying to say, which I got. So the thing is that that's true, but that happens even here, is what he was trying to say. So I think that human problems are problems regardless of demographics. That's one thing. And then now there are more parents coming to me to talk about, I think my child is gay, and I think I found this now, on or in his computer or on his phone or on her, this thing she's incessantly talking to. So, of course, there's more conversation even about counseling. Like till some years back, if you went to a counselor, they thought you're mad. So now the thing is that everyone, because we live such fast-paced lives, at least in the cities, that now they've they made it a point to put it on their to-do list, that you have to see a counselor, and you don't have to discuss, you don't have to be depressed, or you don't have to be neurotically, stressed to such an extent.
In order to
you have to just go to a counselor and share, and that's the reason why we have counselors.
But there's this one. This is from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and it's the most beautiful sentence. And when you were saying we should print it out and get the clergy to read it, this one should be printed out in bold font and stuck to the walls of every city of this country. It says majoritarian views and popular morality cannot dictate constitutional rights, and that is not about the LGBT community. That is not about today's judgment. This applies
to everything,
across the board, and we could spend the next 1 hour talking about various cases where this applies. But it's interesting, from the Chief Justice Deepak Mishra, to be, it was one among the first things he read out today.
Yes, that's true. Just one point I wanted to add to the question that you asked earlier, and I personally believe, this is my personal view, and I think that a large portion of the damage that has gotten done in the discourse, it should be shared by Indian cinema and Indian popular culture.
True. Yes.
The stereotype caricaturing that has been routinely done, whether it is of the transgender community, whether it is of gays in Indian films over the years, that imprints a kind of a message amongst people who may not be aware otherwise, and I think that carries it forward. There is in Indian society, for especially a society which is not as educated or literate, cinema and television play a huge role in how people perceive things, and we've had decades of.
Even today, there are shows that show such rubbish portrayal of the community, and they're very they celebrate it. They're like, but we're getting TRPs. So it's become a numbers game, and I think we need to stop, because if we stop watching it also, what happens is that we put it on and we're like watching it. Yes, we might not be as it might not kind of affect us as much as someone in the more rural areas that don't have.
Which is why some amount of affirmative action that has started happening. I mean, we've covered that story of how the Chennai police got its transgender sub-inspector.
Yes.
The Maharashtra police has got its first. When you do those kind of affirmative actions from the government itself, it kind of helps in people understanding that it's normal. It's not something that's deviant at all.
And I think more and more, affirmative action, also publicizing good work done, appreciating. So many a times we criticize, but in the same vein, to also appreciate, to come if there are good movies being made, to give them awards, to give them to bring it to the fore. And also shaming people. I mean, it's important that we get up and we tell people that you have done this and it's wrong and it's not acceptable.
So he's made a very good point.
Have you seen the strapline? Mr. Karan Johar has said India has got its oxygen back.
Yes.
That's interesting.
No, his point is very valid. He's very valid. We had a movie called Aligarh, which was actually a fabulous film.
Yes.
Which actually investigated the issue like it should have been. But see what happened with that movie. There were enormous attempts made to first get this film banned, then get it stopped, then not get it released in many theatres. And that's the kind of issue that can only be addressed when you have affirmative action.
Let's consider the fact that Aligarh was a fairly powerful film, but even the fluff films. There was the film in which John Abraham and Abhishek Bachchan pretend to be gay in order to be able to rent a home. They're not even really gay. And it became this whole thing which was completely, I mean, it was unjustified. And let's always consider the fact that there will be fringe elements who will jump on anything in order to make it an issue.
And through the late 80s and 90s, I've grown up watching one of our better actors, Anupam Kher, playing gay, wearing pink pajamas and orange t-shirts and doing all kinds of theatrics on the screen. I mean, he's a wonderful actor. I don't know why he ever did those roles. I mean, it beats me. But that's the kind of caricaturing that has actually severely damaged the narrative.
Okay, so before we run out of time, I want a word from each of you, and given your personal experiences, on where you think we should start. And by we, I mean society, I mean parents, I mean principals, I mean the media. Where you think we should start, or what do you think we should do now? Because now we've gotten this far, but what next is an important question to ask. Ashok,
I'd like to say that our real work, that the community's real work starts now. Yes. I mean, this is just, the doors have opened as far as I'm concerned, but all the real issues are going to be, for example, suicide rates. They're about 18 times more among LGBT youth than among usual youth.
Yes.
On the other hand, you have alcoholism among bisexual women and hijras, very, very high alcoholism. If you go on any social app regarding LGBT, you'll see there's an enormous amount of drug abuse. They're asking for pills, they're asking for serosorting, all that is going on. So the mental health issues, that 57% of the people who come to us are suffering from depression. So these issues concerning mental health, sexual and reproductive health are going to come to the forefront. And then, of course, the societal issues about being accepted or not in society.
Where should we start?
I think I completely agree with Amma. I think this is where we start. I think this is where you start the fight, starts now within, in terms of, getting the community together and being there for them.
I just want to point out Keshav Suri at the Lalit who just unfurled a rainbow flag.
He's too cute. He's too cute. By the way, we're having a celebratory party tonight. And I'm performing.
At Lalit.
It's a shameless plug, but okay.
Can I just say before I'm done, as you said, celebrate us. We need to just honestly thank you for everything. No, I'm serious. I used to, have very bad thoughts in my head, and then I had just messaged him once. I remember when I had just come out, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this.
And he spoke at a time when it was not so comfortable for all of us.
Ashok started speaking about this very, very early. Before
legendary.
1983.
1983.
I'm sitting next to a legend too.
I think what's needed now is more and more dialogues, whether and in all aspects, whether it's the medical fraternity, Prasad has started that, and it's a beautiful thing that's happening over there, whether it's families, whether it is within religious circles, whether anywhere. I think dialogues are what are needed, and of course with dialogues you would also identify a lot of people who will belong to a certain who probably would be going through depression or anything of that kind. So I think that becomes extremely important.
Doctor?
So, if you know Ashok long enough as I have known, Ashok is a very, very unreasonable person. And I hope we have more unreasonable people like him who fought incessantly. And we need them more now because what Ashok has fought has been an epic battle. But the battle has begun now because we have to look at the societal change. And it is going to take decades and decades going forward. I'm going to focus on the healthcare part of it, where, as everybody has been pointing out, the mental health is a big issue. And educating healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists on the issues faced by LGBT community is very important. And the students and children, so we have to fight it from all angles, and everybody has to come together and be absolutely unreasonable.
Vinay?
Number one, thank God we have a Supreme Court. Number two, the honest truth being that this is the starting point of the battle. It's not the end point. And I think we will perhaps make a mistake if we assume that victory has been achieved. This is the start. You can't wish away a whole lot of other issues that exist in India unless we carry this forward. I mean, they've given us a great springboard, but from this springboard now, it has to go forward.
So I'll tell you what we are going to do here on Mirror Now. And if you look at the screen, we don't have a bigot on our screen. The debate is over. So all of those conversations where people would talk about how this is not okay and this is not sanskari, and those conversations are over. The Supreme Court has spoken. In fact, we're the only channel at this point that's not debating it anymore. I can see it happening on other channels. We're not going to debate it. It's not up for debate anymore. The debate is over. The verdict is in. The only question we can ask at this point is what next? Where do we go from here? Where do we start? Those are the questions that we have to ask. And the responsibility on the mainstream media is massive at this point. And we have to start at some point in simply taking the next step, educating, informing, as we have been instructed by the Supreme Court, to let as many people know that this judgment has been made. This judgment needs to be upheld, and we have to understand every single sentence of this beautiful judgment that the Supreme Court has given us today. We're going to take a quick break on Mirror Now. We'll come back with more news and updates. I want to thank my panel for being with me. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Faith.
Favorite.
Favorite.
Quick break. Stay with us.